We've seen our fair share of minis on TwinCam, and today the nerdery is very much going to continue. Because if there's one car that's synonymous with limited editions, it has to be the Mini. And as these little cars became fashion accessories in the early 90s, Rover began leaning its weight into the Mini's racing pedigree. So today on TwinCam, this is the Mini Cooper 35. Now I'm sure most of you are thinking, oh dear, it's another Mini he's going to ramble incessantly about with minuscule changes that only the saddest of people would ever know anything about. And on one count, you're absolutely correct. That's exactly what I'm going to do. But on the other side of that argument, it's cars like this that enabled the modern Mini to exist at all, because their success proved the viability of the Mini as a brand of its own, and caused Rover and later BMW to funnel tons of money into a near 40-year-old design purely to keep it ticking over until the new Mini was ready in 2001. Last time we saw a Mini on TwinCam, it was the revival of the Mini Cooper in 1990, known as the RSP or Rover Special Products. And that car came about because Rover realised there was an undercurrent of Mini tuning and support still going on, complete with the appetite for a factory-finished sporty Mini. It all started in Japan when Rover dealers had John Cooper and Janspeed create a tuning kit for the standard 998cc Minis. Rover in the UK got wind of it, and we wound up with the limited run RSP Cooper. But the RSP was incredibly well received. So seriously it was taken that the press compared it with the latest and greatest hot hatches, many of which had over double the power of the Mini. The 1,650 cars Rover planned to build sold out almost overnight, and the following year, with slight modifications, the Cooper became a mainstream production Mini, sitting as the halo above the City and Mayfair. Now the Cooper may have gained a detuned MG Metro engine, but the centre of its attraction was the jazziness. The stripes, the spot lamps, the alloy wheels, all things you wouldn't have found on an original 60s Cooper. But they were such a powerful statement that they became the standard look for a Mini. And that's where we come to the 35, created as a celebration for the 35th anniversary of the Mini Cooper. Anniversary edition Minis were nothing new. Just as there have been dozens of general limited edition Minis, there was a new anniversary one every 5 years or so, beginning with the 1100 Special celebrating 20 years of the Mini in 1979. We then fast forward through the Mini 25, the Mini 30 and the Mini 35 in 1994. The Cooper 35 came along in 96, complete with a retro almond green paint scheme or the option of flame red if you're in Japan. It also comes with charcoal mini light alloy wheels, the most garish porcelain green leather trim, a wood dashboard, some decals, and on the surface, that's about it. So what? It's another LE Mini. But behind the scenes, and just about traceable in this one, Rover was spending a lot more money than the Mini was worth, all to keep it alive until they could figure out what to do next. Back in the 1980s, the then named Austin Rover had planned on killing off the Mini in around 1988. After all, it wasn't their volume small car anymore, and with it being quite expensive to build, it was considered a bit of a relic. A popular relic with one hell of a community, but a relic nonetheless. To put this in perspective, BMC, BL, Austin Rover, whatever they wanted to call themselves that week, managed to build 3 million Minis between 1965 and 1976. It took them a further 10 years to add another million, and in the 14 years between 1986 and the end of production in 2000, depending on who you believe, they only built around 300,000. It was only really out of personal love that Rover kept building it long enough for us to meet the RSP, and it was only then that Rover truly recognised its potential. Even before BMW bought Rover in 1994, the idea of either a brand new or totally revised Mini had been bandied about. As a bit of an experiment in 1992, Rover took a bare Mini body shell and effectively started from scratch. They cut off the rear end and fitted a hatchback, They moved the fuel tank to under the rear seats and designed a totally new dashboard complete with dials from a Honda Beat. But the centre of attention was the engineering. Rover had defied expectations in 1990 by creating the new Metro, widely acclaimed as one of the best small cars in the world, so this new Mini would borrow a lot from its bigger brother. They cut up Metro subframes and managed to squeeze in hydrogas suspension, while planning on taking the advanced and lightweight K-Series engine and making a 3-cylinder out of it, allowing the Mini to have an on-end gearbox for the first time. The car was called Minky for obvious reasons, but in the end it barely made it off the drawing board. Fast forward to 1994 and Rover had new overlords in the shape of BMW. Some suited men from Munich hopped over to Longbridge and pondered on the point of the Mini. Cue Rover's engineers scrambling around to find Minky, only to hear the car had been scrapped. Rover scurried around and took another Mini shell, this time stretching it lengthwise and widthwise, fitting the aforementioned Metro subframes and hydrogas suspension, then using the extra space to fit the 4-cylinder 16-valve K-Series. This car became known as Minky 2, and fortunately, this one survives. Apparently, BMW was impressed, but with Euro NCAP around the corner, it was never seriously going to happen, and we ended up with the R50 Mini in 2001. But the point of this little story is that serious thought was given to essentially retaining the original Mini body shell, and for a car built in such small volumes, quite a lot of money was thrown at the production car just to keep it ticking over. The RSP Mini had the same basic SU carburettor that you'd have found in any Mini since the year dot, but this is when emissions controls were becoming a thing, so to suit the Japanese market, which actually took more Minis than the UK in 1990, they were all fitted with catalytic converters. And by the time this 35 was built, they'd become standard across the range. But more importantly than that, Rover had taken this archaic 1950s overhead valve engine and fitted it with fuel injection. In 1992, the 998cc engine was dropped, making the whole range 1275cc, and that made a lot of sense because the Mini was now the only car using the A-Series engine. But it also proved once and for all that the Cooper was mainly for show, because now even a basic Mini Sprite had essentially the same performance. However, the one thing the Mini lacked was a modern fuel injection system, because this has single point fuel injection. Now, single point fuel injection isn't perfect. It doesn't give you the precise control that a multi-point system gives you, and the Mini community is a bit ho-hum about them for various reasons. And the way it works is that you have one big fuel injector sat in the middle of a bowl that squirts fuel everywhere and serves the 2 ports and all 4 cylinders. And so it kind of acts like a single electric carburettor. Need second gear for this hill. But of course, with it being fuel injected, it also has an electric fuel pump. Now, some very early Minis did also have electric SU fuel pumps, but this proper high pressure modern fuel pump is a lot better than having one driven off the camshaft mechanically, because it means the car starts up quicker. You can't not love a Mini. I just had to say. But it means that it warms up quicker, it means it starts quicker, and it doesn't need tuning, of course. So in period, in terms of tractability, usability and reliability, having fuel injection was better. Now, this particular car makes about 62 brake horsepower. And while that's not an awful lot, we've got to remember a Mini weighs about 700 kilograms. I couldn't tell you for this exact car, but I'd guess this one's around 700. And it's still more than enough. Now, John Cooper garages would do you a tuning kit for one of these, and for all the normal minis, and also the later multi-point injection minis, which are a topic for another day. And you know, you can make a mini make well over 100 brake horsepower today, but this one with 62 is just more than enough. In fact, I've been told by the owner of this car that despite the fact it's totally standard, it's been on a rolling road and actually made 74 brake horsepower. Now, I don't know how that works, but it feels fast, it really does. Now, the last Mini I drove was a Mark III Cooper S with a Swift Tune engine, so it's really not comparable with this one. But in terms of driving experience, of course, it's still a Mini. Yet, I would like to talk a little bit about some of the ergonomic changes through the Mini's life that just altered things up a little bit. And first and foremost is this steering wheel. Now this little 3-spoke steering wheel is one that Austin Rover have been using since the early 1980s. I think the MG Metro was the first car that used it. And it's 3-spoke wheel. It's so perfectly designed. It's not flashy in any way, but it's just a nice steering wheel. But the point is that this wheel is much smaller than the kind of bus steering wheel you find on a Mark I Cooper S or the Mark III Cooper S I drove. And so the steering is noticeably heavier in this car. You approach the steering in a totally different way, really grabbing it by the scruff of the neck and just powering through corners. It really brings the steering of the Mini alive to have a smaller steering wheel. And if I had an earlier Cooper S, which I would love, while the original wheels look brilliant and original, I would have to fit a smaller wheel because it just gives the car so much more of an aggressive attitude. It takes it from being, you know, an easy to drive little shopping car to something you have to use your muscles to drive. Of course, there's no power steering, but no Mini's ever had power steering, and if you need power steering in a car this big, then there's probably something wrong with you. Happiness is definitely Mini-shaped. You just cannot help but get into one of these little cars, thrash it and love it. Properly love it. Every time I drive one, I want one. Now, I wouldn't drive my BMW like this because it's too big and too powerful. This is the joy of tiny cars that weigh nothing and don't have all that much power, really, because you can grab them by the scruff of the neck, as I've said. The Mini is the greatest car ever made. Every time I drive one, it just enforces that view of the world because they're so joyful. Now, barring the steering wheel, of course, there are a number of other ergonomic changes, one of which the fact I've got proper seats. Now, Rover in the 80s and 90s absolutely nailed seats. I don't think anyone did seats better than Rover in this period. It doesn't help with the driving position because it's still mad. I mean, look at the angle of the steering wheel. And also the pedals are making my shins hurt. And the seat is all the way back. And I'm only 5'9". I'm not tall. And already the Mini is made for people a foot shorter than me. But hey ho, that's Issigonis for you. It's so buzzy, that engine, but it's so lovable. Oh dear, what a thing. But also, of course, the gear change is different. So not only does this have a proper gear knob, of course, compared to an early Mini, and I'm still bobbling up and down like I do in any Mini, but this car has a rod change, which every Mini had from 1973 onwards, but we've not driven one together before on Twin Cam. So compared to the remote change, which a lot of people really like, the remote change was the one fitted to Mini Thousands in the 60s and early 70s, I think. And it was fitted to the Coopers and Cooper S's, the original Coopers and Cooper S's. And people really liked the remote change because it kind of clicks into each gear really satisfyingly. But before you get to that gear, it's incredibly vague. So this rod change was introduced in order to make the Mini's gear shift feel more normal, and it really does. While it doesn't click into any of the gears, it has a really positive change. And while the BMC front drive gearbox in some cars get a really bad name for the quality of their gear shifts, this one's really nice. This one is endlessly better than my Metro, actually. So clearly the rod selector needs to be changed on my Metro, because this is fantastic. What else can I say? It's a Mini and it's absolutely joyous. There is nothing better. I shouldn't be saying this, because I've got to the point where people have started saying, oh, don't talk about this car because you'll make the prices go up. My channel's not popular enough for that. Then again, with Minis, can prices go up any further? I just really don't want them to go up at all, because I want one. If someone wants to give me a Mini, I would be eternally grateful. Just to take things to the next level, they entered the Mini in the 1994 Monte Carlo Rally, with Paddy Hopkirk himself at the wheel, celebrating 30 years since his famous win. This is something that only 10 years before, hell, only 5 years before, would have been unheard of. Rover had once and for all realised the marketing potential the Mini had. But the strange thing about all this hoo-ha though, is the fact it didn't make any perceptible difference to Mini sales. Judging by the way I've been speaking, you'd be forgiven for thinking there was a renaissance in Mini sales, but the renaissance was actually in image only. While there was a bump in sales around the time of the Cooper tuning kits, the RSP, then the introduction of the mainstream Cooper, it didn't manage to sustain that bump. And I have an inkling there are a couple of reasons for this. The year is 1996. We're now 6 years removed from the Cooper RSP, and what other small cars are on the market? You could have a Mark V Fiesta, or a Corsa B, or a Renault Clio, or a Peugeot 106. Now personally, I'd have a Mini, but I'm not most people. And objectively, the Mini is a terrible car in that company. Because while it's all well and good to have a fun car, most people want something that's comfortable, well equipped, roomy and safe. And the Mini is none of those things. So nobody looking for a decent small car would even consider one. That's reason one. Secondly, as the Mini became a fashion accessory, it became appallingly expensive. A Mini was more expensive than many of those Super Minis I mentioned a second ago, because they were still largely hand-built. So the whole 90s Mini revival was more in terms of awareness and perception than it was in actually selling cars. But as we've come to discover since the turn of the millennium, that was all it needed to be. This is all a long-winded way of saying what we all know about limited edition cars. They're a marketing gimmick. While a good number of the Mini LEs are more than that, such as the RSP, later cars like this were about celebrating the brilliance of these little cars, keeping their memory fresh for the new car's launch in 2001. And with that, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'm forever indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, so if you'd like to support me that way, then please do follow the link in the description. And I'll have more videos coming along soon.